Thank you very much for that very warm welcome. I wouldn't expect anything else from the UK. Around the world, Brits are known as being a nation of animal lovers. And I am incredibly honored to be speaking at Sea Shepherd's 35-year anniversary benefit here, but I do it with a heavy heart. And the reason that I do it with a heavy heart is because I should not be the person who is on stage today. It should be Captain Paul Watson, who founded this organization back in 1977 and who has dedicated his entire life to, at great personal risk, to protect marine wildlife at sea. And it's simply because we've been so effective at protecting the oceans and its inhabitants that Captain Paul Watson cannot be here tonight. Captain Paul Watson, because we bankrupted the Japanese whaling fleet 2 years in a row, because we have them on the ropes, because they haven't made a profit in so many years, and because we've saved 4,000 whales over the past 8 campaigns in Antarctica, the Japanese government is out for Captain Paul Watson's head. But what I am really glad to be here to do is to be able to speak about the things that Captain Paul Watson would be speaking about if he was here today. And those are the things that he is incredibly passionate about, which is the oceans and protecting them. And to give you an idea of how selfless this man is, he's my captain, he's my friend. I've sailed with him for 10 years. I would sail with him, and I have sailed with him to the ends of the earth and back again and again. I visited him when he was in jail in Frankfurt in Germany. And when I saw him in jail, I asked him what you would ask your captain or your friend. I said, hey Paul, how are you doing? Are you getting enough to eat? How are the other inmates? How are they treating you? How are the guards treating you? Do you get to go outside? And Paul did not even answer my question. All he did was look me straight in the eye and ask me, how are things going preparing for the Antarctic campaign? Tell me where the Bridget Bardot is and what they're doing right now. And Paul's concern, not for one single minute, was about himself and his well-being and his safety. All he cared about was the ships being out there and protecting marine wildlife. It's the reason that I'm so proud to sail with him. This is a man who, in 35 years with Sea Shepherd, his passion has not changed one single iota. And it's a complete rarity. You do something for so long, to still have that fire inside of you is totally unique. And the reason that I know that his passion is absolutely unchanged is because of a campaign we did in Antarctica in 2008. A minke whale, a pregnant female minke whale, had been harpooned, and she had been harpooned about 15 minutes away from where the Steve Irwin was at the time. And that meant that unfortunately we were not in a position with our ship to directly intervene and save her life. So as I was standing next to Paul on the bridge, our helicopter pilot, Chris Altman, was reporting on what was happening minute by minute. And from the time she was harpooned first until the time she finally died, the time she drowned in her own blood, it had taken 22 minutes and 40 seconds. She was harpooned twice, she was shot another 7 times by rifle shot, and it took 22 minutes and 40 seconds before she died. And I remember looking over at Captain Paul Watson for guidance, wondering, what do we do now? And I could see in his eyes just this perfect combination of sadness and rage. And he took the helm of the Steve Irwin. He put the ship exactly where it needed to be, which was between the Japanese factory whaling ship and this harpoon ship. And 1,000 tons of steel collided with 1,000 tons of steel. And the Japanese whaling fleet has never dared to whale in our presence again. Captain Paul Watson is a unique individual who 35 years ago started the most unique marine conservation organization in the world, which is Sea Shepherd. It is the most effective, the most aggressive marine conservation organization in the world. And I thought it would be beneficial just to go through a couple of the reasons why I think that Sea Shepherd really sets the bar. The first is that we are not a protest organization. Sea Shepherd is a law enforcement organization. And the reason for that is that we have all of these laws in place, but nobody's enforcing them. We have a marine reserve in the Galapagos Islands, one of the most precious, unique, treasure places in the world, a place where Charles Darwin himself came and came up with this theory of evolution. And even though this area is protected, shark populations in the Galapagos Marine Reserve have fallen by as much as 70% in the past 35 years. We have a global moratorium on commercial whaling. Since 1986, it's been illegal to kill a whale. And yet ever since that time, Japan, Iceland, and Norway have together killed over 40,000 whales. So what Sea Shepherd does is we fill a gap. What we do is we go and we intervene when the governments of the world lack either the political will or the economic means to do anything about these poaching problems. The second thing that makes Sea Shepherd very unique from any other group is that we don't measure our success by how much money we pull in. We don't measure our success by how much media attention we're getting. We measure our success by the number of lives that we're able to save and by the number of criminal operations that we shut down. And in 35 years, we've rammed 7 illegal whaling ships on the high seas. We've sunk another 10 in their ports, all without causing a single injury. But the number of lives that we've been able to save through our direct action is countless. Thirdly, and this is very important, we are morally consistent. If somebody outside right here were about to kick a dog, then we would intervene right then and there. We would stop that abuse from happening. We wouldn't be following after them, holding a banner asking them to stop. We wouldn't be holding a placard. We wouldn't take pictures of this abuse to hope that maybe someday it ends up in the news. We would physically intervene and stop that violence from happening right then and there. I'm not a very big guy. The crew on my ship referred to me as the Hammer, and it's an intimidating name. But I can assure you it doesn't come from my body mass index. It comes from my surname. But if I heard a case of abuse, domestic violence, in the apartment next to mine, I wouldn't call the Stockholm police where I live and wait for them to show up 2 hours later when the violence is said and done. I would take my somewhat frail frame and I would put it into that door frame, and even if I broke my shoulder in the process, I would try to get that door down. Because the fact of the matter is that evil only happens when good people stand by and do nothing. So if that's the way that I would act in the case of someone kicking a dog in the street or someone beating somebody in the apartment next door to mine, then why would my reaction be any differently to somebody about to harpoon a threatened or endangered whale in a designated whale sanctuary, or somebody is about to fin sharks solely for the money placed on their fins in a designated marine reserve? We are morally consistent, but we are non-violent. And what Captain Paul Watson has been able to do is coin the phrase aggressive nonviolent. We are aggressively opposing these poaching operations, but we never cause an injury, certainly not a death, and that's because our movement is about respecting life. Fourthly, and this is why I love Sea Shepherd. This is why I joined when I was 18 years old and I was all big-eyed and there was nothing I wanted to do more than to get out on a Sea Shepherd ship. And that's that Sea Shepherd's clients, the ones we represent, are the whales, the dolphins, the seals, the bluefin tuna. Those are our clients. We don't care what people think about what we do, which may seem a little bit strange in that I'm addressing all of you right now. But the fact remains whether you supported us or not, we would do what it takes to get out on the sea and get in the way of these poaching operations, because it is to our clients, the whales and the dolphins and the seals, that we are answerable. And that's why I joined Sea Shepherd, in part when I read this story that Captain Paul Watson, after half of Iceland's whaling fleet was sunk in Reykjavik harbor in 1986, Iceland stopped whaling for almost 2 decades. And you can call that a coincidence, or you can call that incredibly effective campaigning. I would prefer the latter. But after these ships were sunk, a representative from Greenpeace, John Frizzell, came up to Captain Paul Watson at a pub and said, "What you have done is unforgivable, it is despicable, it has set back the whale conservation movement for decades." And Paul just looked at him and said, "Who the hell do you think you are? We did not sink those ships for you. We didn't sink those ships for Greenpeace. We did it for the whales. Find me one single whale who would disagree with what we did, and we will stop." The need for Sea Shepherd is greater even now than it was 35 years ago. And that's because the situation facing our oceans is not getting better, it is getting worse. The oceans are in a state of crisis. Out of the 17 fishing hotspots, these are areas of the world that throughout human history have always had fish. Places like the Grand Banks off of Newfoundland. Every single one of them has collapsed beyond repair. We look at sharks, one of the greatest predators in our marine ecosystems, an animal that has shaped the evolution of every other fish species, as a fish that has not evolved much at all in millions of years because they are the perfect predator, monitoring and controlling the health of ecosystems. 73 million sharks are killed every single year. That's 10,000 sharks an hour. And it's to such a rate that if you look at shark populations in the North Atlantic, shark populations have fallen by as much as 95% in the past 35 years. And it's so bad, in fact, that scientists around the world fear that by 2012, 20 shark species could go extinct. And the only reason this is happening is because the price put on their head for the price of their fins, so that they are sold as shark fin soup in Asia. If you look at what's happening to the bluefin tuna, here is one of the most special fish to ever swim. It is an awesome predator, and it is a fish whose population is at 3% of what it was 35 years ago. So you would think, surely our governments and our elected officials and these countries, surely they would get involved and give this fish protection. I mean, of course they would, right? And the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species is asking for this to be listed as an endangered species. And yet what does ICAT do, the International Coalition for the so-called Conservation of Atlantic Tuna? They decide, rather than call a stop of the bluefin tuna fishing season, they actually set a quota for 13,500 tons. And then the actual amount that's caught is 60,000 tons. Because 3 out of 4 of these fish landed is caught illegally. And here is an example where the governments of the world have failed, and the only thing that's going to make any difference in the lives of these animals and in the health of this ecosystem is the actions of passionate individuals. And so when Sea Shepherd came across a bluefin tuna poaching operation 2 years ago off the coast of Libya, we didn't take pictures, we didn't hang banners, we sent 5 divers in the water, they cut that net open, and they set the 800 tuna that were in that net free. These problems, and we have to deal with them if we want any hope at all of surviving as a species, because when we face the reality of the situation, the Earth is primarily oceans. 75% of the Earth is ocean. And yet ocean conservation issues rarely, if ever, get the attention that it deserves. The oceans for most people are something out of sight and out of mind. What happens with industrial trawling and illegal longline fishing and illegal drift net fishing is something that we don't see on a daily basis. And so because of that, these practices continue. And so what Sea Shepherd is able to do is we are able to go on the front lines where most people cannot, and we are able to directly intervene and stop these atrocities from happening. And while these issues, these ocean conservation issues may seem so daunting, and while the repercussions of not doing enough are so very real, what I've found with my time with Sea Shepherd is that I am inspired and I am filled with hope on a day-to-day basis. And the reason for that is Sea Shepherd, in my experience, has over and over again been able to make impossible things, seemingly impossible things, possible. Because this is Sea Shepherd's 35-year anniversary event, I think I wouldn't feel right to not talk about the Canadian seal hunt. And the reason I want to talk about it is because Captain Paul Watson is a Canadian, and the first campaign that Sea Shepherd ever did was to stop the clubbing of baby harp seals. These are 4 to 6 week old seal pups. 60% of them are skinned alive in the east coast of Canada. When Sea Shepherd started, this seemed like an impossible task. 300,000 of these baby harp seals were being clubbed to death. And yet it was through the passion and dedication of many, many individuals over many, many years that finally saw an end to that slaughter. What I'd like to do is tell a little bit of a story, which is how we were able to achieve that victory. And I want to tell it because it's my personal story to some degree. And so because of that, I hope that it will make you realize that when Captain Paul Watson quotes Woody Allen saying that 90% of success of any movement or any campaign or any action is just showing up, which is what you've done here today, then I hope this story will prove to you that it's true. In 2008, Sea Shepherd had very few ships. We had this incredibly rust bucket vessel. It was called the Farley Mowat. It was an old North Sea trawler. We could do 9 knots on a very good day. I mean, that's a really, really good day. 8 knots on a good day. I mean, this is like bicycling after these poaching boats. And Captain Paul Watson knew that the European Parliament was on the eve of voting on a possible ban on the importation of all seal products. He also knew that we had a ship to get rid of, and ships are incredibly expensive to retire. So what better way to retire a ship than to let the Canadian government do it for us? So Captain Paul Watson, being Canadian, it would have been ill-advised for him to be on the campaign. So he comes up to me and he says, "Peter, I'd like you to be my first mate on this ship, and I'd like you to take the vessel up to Canada, and I'd like you to get the ship seized, while bringing as much attention as possible to the issue of the Canadian seal hunt." So I asked Paul, okay, I can try to do that. But sooner or later, they're going to ask us to keep half a nautical mile away from the seal hunt. So when we're 50 meters away, and they ask for our seal observation permits, what do you want me to say? And Paul thought about it for a second, and then he said, well, tell them like in the Wild Western movies. Tell them, like, we don't need no stinking badges. Tell them we don't need no stinking permit. So I said, okay, when Paul asks you to do something, you do it. So a couple of days later, we're in the ice. We're circling very closely to the sealing boat. They've just been brutally killing these poor baby harp seals. And because we've showed up on the scene and because we're cutting in close across their bow, they've called it quits for that moment. So we're being pursued. Here's our incredibly slow-moving rust bucket ship. We're being covered by 2 Canadian Coast Guard icebreakers, a Canadian warship, and we're being flown over by a helicopter and 2 planes, one from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and one from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And finally, the radio call comes in. I hear from one of the Coast Guard icebreakers, "Farley Mowat, this is the Canadian icebreaker George R. Perks. You are instructed to keep half a mile away at all times." So I think about it for a minute. What did Paul want me to say again? And I reply, We're a Dutch registered ship. We have freedom of movement through these waters. To be frank, sir, we don't need no stinking permits. And the response was silence. They thought about it for 30 seconds or so and radioed back and said, "Okay, sir. Well, in that case, you're in violation of the Seal Protection Act." See, they call it the Seal, it's really the Sealer Protection Act. And they say you have to keep half a nautical mile away, and you are now in violation of the law, and enforcement action will be taken against you. I'm thinking, okay, now we can retire this ship, great. So I replied back and I said, there's no crime being committed here. The only crime here is a crime against nature, the brutal slaughter of the harp seal. And that was it. After that point, we started taking bets on the ship. We had this whiteboard in the mess, and we started taking bets on when do we think that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police will finally take this ship from us. 5 days later, we had 18 boats out of 19 votes, yes, and my incredibly naive vote no. And all of a sudden, a SWAT team from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police came on board, they kicked in some doors, and within 5 minutes they seized the entire ship. Loyola Hearn, who was the Minister of Fisheries in Canada at the time, he immediately goes out into the media and proclaiming how great of a victory this is for the sealing industry, and he says what Captain Paul Watson needs to know is that there is a new white herb in town. Subsequently, Captain Paul Watson goes out in the media and says, oh, well, that's funny because we wanted the ship taken. And subsequently, 2 weeks later, Loyola Hearn lost his job. Captain Alex Cornelius and I were arrested. We were taken to jail. We were interrogated by the Serious Crimes Unit of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. As you would, these guys are investigating bank robberies. Surely they would be put on interrogating some seal huggers. And for 6 hours we sat in this interrogation, not cooperating, keeping completely silent, not saying a word. So when we finally moved over to the jail, and the allegations that they were coming up with were absolutely ridiculous. Here I am sitting in a chair. My only violation is violating the Sealer Protection Act. I've been within half a nautical mile, which is 926 meters, of someone brutally killing a harp seal, and I've been filming without permission. And so there I am sitting in this room, hour 4, and this big RCMP officer leans over me and he says, boy, when I look at you, I see a 12-year-old Palestinian boy walking into a supermarket in Tel Aviv with a backpack full of nails and detonating that explosive. And I'm thinking, what the heck did I do that? And then he says, boy, the only reason you have to keep quiet is if you're planning something like the next 9/11. Is that what you came here to do? And I'm thinking, the only thing I did was film a seal being skinned alive. But not cooperating with this guys just drove them insane. So after 6 hours, they took us outside, they moved us to jail, and they were just absolutely exhausted. I hear one of the interrogating officers say to the other interrogating officer, hey, did you get anything from Cornelison? And he says, no. Did you get anything from Hammerstedt? No, not a word. He didn't say a word. And then the first guy kind of sighs and he says, damn, these seal huggers are tougher to crack than the Hells Angels. But to sum up the story, Alex and I, we were deported, but the fact of the matter is that the headlines on this were so huge, and that together with a coalition of other animal and environmental groups, the ban on the ban on seal products for the European Union passed. And so we went from seeing 300,000 baby harp seals brutally clubbed to death every single year to now, because there's no economics to it at all, the number of seals killed in Canada is down by 90%. The point is, we didn't really have to do that much. All we had to do is take a ship up there, ignore a bunch of orders from the police, get arrested, and then not say anything, get a free ticket back home, and then boom, seal hunt was over. But the point is that 90% of success is showing up, and that's why I'm so inspired to see every single one of you here tonight. And I cannot think of a better example of how showing up makes all the difference in the world. Because the place that we show up at the end of every single year is the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary in Antarctica. Despite the global moratorium on commercial whaling, every year the Japanese whaling fleet leaves Tokyo with their mind set on killing 935 minke whales, 50 endangered fin whales, and 50 endangered humpback whales in a designated whale sanctuary. Here is a situation where whaling is against the law, where we have public opinion on our side, where we have the media on our side, but yet still these guys are going down there. When that happens, I don't see any other choice but passionate and dedicated individuals like ourselves actually going down there and stopping these guys ourselves. So every year we scour this vast area. This is the most pristine, remote, beautiful area of the world, a place that is almost untouched by human beings. And we look for this fleet of killer ships. And when we find the factory whaling ship of the Japanese fleet, we get right on their slipway. We follow them wherever they go, through the roughest weather imaginable, to the toughest ice conditions that exist, despite any danger posed to us, despite the violence of our opponents. And every day that we're able to follow them is a day that we shut down their whaling. And every day that we shut down their whaling is 20 to 30 whales saved. And that's why I can say that on this last campaign in Antarctica, we were able to save 829 whales from slaughter. And the year before that, we were able to save 763 whales from slaughter. And in 8 years of intervention, we have saved over 4,000 whales in Antarctica. That is 4,000 whales that are having their calves off the coast of Australia, that are swimming free because passionate individuals like my crews, our volunteers, and people like you said enough is enough. There's a line in the sand. This is the line. You do not go any further than this. But the campaign that I, through my 10 years with Sea Shepherd, has always had a place closest to my heart, did not involve at-sea collisions with illegal whaling ships. It didn't involve confrontations with the Canadian Coast Guard over the seal hunt. The campaign that really I think about, probably more than any other campaign, was that 3 years ago, Captain Paul Watson asked myself and 4 other crew to go assist in a mass stranding of pilot whales in a place called King Island off the coast of Tasmania. When we arrived on the scene, 54 pilot whales had been stranded alive, and we were able to reintroduce every single one of those animals back to sea. But as the weather took a turn for the worse, one of these pilot whales ended up re-stranding herself. And just at that moment, the weather took a turn for the worse. So myself and my crew, we spent 3 days alongside this pilot whale. During the day, we would cover her in wet blankets to prevent her skin from cracking. We set up wind guards to protect her from the elements. I remember having a stopwatch, and my role was to measure her breathing. And from the time she was stranded, I could feel that she was breathing once every 40 seconds. To on the 3rd day, she was so exhausted that her breathing had slowed down to once every 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And by that 3rd day, whenever she would blow, I could smell the scent of her breath smelled like curdled milk. And I knew that she was really dehydrated. But fortunately, at that very moment, the weather brightened up again. And so we took her between 2 jet skis with a towing line, and we started dragging her back out to sea. When we were about 50 meters off the coast, she thrashed against the line, and she broke free of the line and swam 200 meters on a completely different course. And we were wondering, what is happening now? Is she going to be okay? But from the helicopter, what they saw is that the other 53 pilot whales that had stranded 3 days earlier were right there waiting for her. And when she came out to her pod, they circled her, they nudged her, And together, all 54 of these pilot whales went back out to open ocean together. That is why I am absolutely convinced that these animals are intelligent, social creatures with as complex familial structures as we have. And that is why I am absolutely convinced that the killing of a whale or a dolphin is the same as murder. And so when I look at our victories, and I can stand up here and say that because of your help, we saved 763 whales in Antarctica. I don't think of that as a number. I think of that as 763 times one individual. That's 763 times an animal just like that pilot whale. Right now we're preparing for a return to Antarctica. And this year we're going back stronger than ever before. We're going down with not just 3 ships, but 4 ships. We're adding a 4th vessel to our fleet called the Sam Simon. And we're calling this campaign Operation Zero Tolerance, because the idea behind this campaign is that we find the fleet earlier than ever before. We send them home earlier than ever before. And we make sure that they go home to Japan